Oh, yeah, very informative. This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And today we have another UFO related interview. It's been a while. This is the second interview with Richard Lang of Lang Publications. He's got a new book out, and this is called UFO Investigation, but specifically it's related to police, fire department, and rescue. First Responders Guide to UFO Encounters. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Lang. How's everything been with you since the publication of your last book?
Well, this is the third book that I've published, and essentially what I'd done is my first book was written for um, people that investigate UFO cases, and it's very technical, and it's basically soup to nuts: how to investigate, how to interview, how to videotape, photography, all kinds of equipment that you might want to use, and that kind of thing. The second book I wrote was for the public, and basically what I was getting feedback from is my friends were like, "This is great, but it's too complicated." So I wrote a book that's just basically geared to the general public. If you don't know a whole lot about UFOs, but you're interested in it, this is the book you want to read. And essentially, I just went through um, the history of what's happened. I think, which is very important. This is something that is starting to come out in the general public now. We're seeing with the hearings in Congress in the United States, people like David Gresh, the whistleblowers that are coming forward and testifying in Congress. They're on live, open television broadcasts, and they're talking about non-human biologicals and craft that's of extraterrestrial origin that's been captured and recovered and being used in various defense contractor and technology companies where they're basically have the wreckage and they're doing the research and back engineering. This has been going on for 70 years. But a lot of people out there might think that, we're starting to hear about it in the last couple, 3 years, and this is all new, and that's not true. The government's been very heavily involved in this since the Truman administration. And so, if you look at that 70-year period of time, they've recovered a number of these crafts. In my book, I listed, I think there's about 35 of them that we know of where they were recovered and then sent to technology companies. And so what they're doing is they're doing research and engineering, and they also when the government made the deals with these people back in the Eisenhower administration, they let them uh, basically make all the money they wanted on the technology, and also they let them have patent rights on things they developed as long as they kept the technology for the military applications. And I think by the time Eisenhower was ready to leave the office, a lot of these companies kind of went renegade on the government, and they're basically like, look, they wouldn't tell them what they were doing anymore, and that really upset Eisenhower. They had told him that he didn't have high enough security clearance, and so a lot of these companies have been running renegade for the last 40, 50 years, pretty much doing whatever they want. And they've developed an unbelievable amount of power and money from the technology they've developed. So you fast forward to now, and basically what you have in Congress is you have these congressmen that are looking at this and um, wanting to know what's really going on in working with Pentagon people and that kind of thing. So last year, the in the United States, they allocate money for the military. It's called the National Defense Authorization Act. And basically, what they did is they put language in there that said anyone that is working in an area where they have direct hands-on contact with non-human biologicals and also with crash wreckage that's been recovered where it's of extraterrestrial origin, they basically gave those people amnesty and immunity from prosecution if they were to come forward and testify to Congress. And that got signed into law last year at the end of the year. So it's now a federal law. So these people are protected under federal law. And then that's what's opened the door where you're seeing these people coming forward, like David Gresh, testifying in Congress. They're televising the interviews, and they're talking about, wreckage that's been recovered in bodies that they have in various facilities. So that's really opened the door for a lot of public understanding. Up until the last couple, 3 years, this is a pretty taboo subject. And somehow, with all this now coming out into the public light, basically the average person is starting to wake up and say, hey, this is real. And so my third book that I wrote was basically one that I was talking to some of the local sheriffs in Virginia where I live. And the, one of the fellows is like, he's really interested in UFO stuff. He's telling me about, he reads a lot of books about it and stuff like that. He's a high level of interest. But he's, basically what they're conveying to me is they really didn't understand what was going on, and their people don't understand what's going on. And one guy told me they had something land up in the forest one night, and they weren't really sure what to do. And he had said to me at some point, would you come in and talk to my team about this and just help them come up to speed on what's going on? So that's what really motivated me to write the third book. And that's what the book's about. The beginning of the book has a chapter of just terms, and it's like a glossary. What's a UFO? What's a UAP? What's an AAV? What's a USO? What's a fast walker mean, and all that kind of stuff, talking about what abduction is, and just the general terms of the ufology, the science, so that the person, when they get through that, they'll have a little bit better understanding of what's going on. Then there's a chapter in there that talks about the history, which I just explained, going back to Truman, talking about how they've been recovering these things and the technology. As far as the police go, there's two chapters that are very important. One of them, it's called recon units, and I'll talk about that if you want. And then there's a chapter basically what to do and not do if you're and if you're on patrol and something happens and you get close to something like this, the things that you need to know more about personal safety. I mean, I didn't write this book so police officers can start investigating UFO sightings. What my book is written about is to make sure that if they encounter something like this, they understand it at least to a point and know how to protect themselves from the hazards that might occur, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, in my research, and this is a book I'm definitely going to pick up. As far as radiation and so forth, there seems to be quite a bit of potential health hazards that people could pick up potentially from UFOs. So yes, please go into that aspect
Okay.
of why a police officer might want to pick up this book.
Well, okay, there's a couple of things. I'd start with recon units, because if something really does happen, like if you're a sheriff in a remote county somewhere, something crashes or lands somewhere in your county, it's probably going to be in a remote area. And what will typically happen is the United States has what they call recon units that are very efficient in terms of, if something comes down, they usually know about it and they're on it really fast. So the recon unit's probably going to get there very quickly. And what they're going to do is they're going to ask the local police to set up a perimeter to keep people out of there. And in some cases, it may even have to evacuate some people if their homes are like right near the spot where this occurs. So local police are going to be asked to create a perimeter and help with evacuation. They're going to put a cover story out, and it's going to be something to the effect that there's some kind of a toxic event going on, a spill, train wreck, plane crash, whatever, to try to scare people away, to keep people from trying to get into that area. So the police are going to be more in terms of local police will probably be very involved in perimeters, and they may not really be involved and know what's really going on inside there. So I always want people to understand that's really how this comes down, is how it reels out when it happens. Now, as far as the police officer is concerned, there's a possibility that something could happen and you'd get called, in the middle of the night, you're out on patrol and somebody calls in to the dispatcher and says, hey, something crashed or landed out in my pasture where my horses are. And so you're going to go out there and see what's going on. So it very well could be that you'd be there before anything else is going on. And based on that, I had a chapter. It's basically what to do and not do. And we can talk about some of that stuff. First of all, it everything that I write about is pretty much based on experiences that I've had where I've worked on cases or interviewed people. I'm not a really good researcher where I read a lot of books about this stuff. And, most everything that I write about something I've had some kind of personal experience with or interviewed someone that had some personal experience with it. So what we've learned in the past is there's a lot of cases where you have people that have had encounters. They're out on a country road somewhere and a UAP, UFO stops them. So their car stopped and the thing's hovering over them or around them. And you've got the scenario where like one guy is like real curious and he hops out of the car and he's running around trying to figure out what's going on. And the other guy is scared. He's got the crap scared out of him and he's cowered up and rolled up in the floor in the back seat of the car. Okay. So then look at those same people 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks later, and the guy that was out running around is starting to develop all kind of health problems, and cancerous tumor, all kinds of things, eye problems. The guy that was cowered up in the back seat hiding in the car has no health effects. So we could say with some certainty and with some confidence that if you're a police officer and you roll up on something, the safest thing you can do is stay in your car, because the metal around the car protects you from the different types of radiation a lot. When what we've learned in the past is that there are, and there's a couple of different devices that I've mentioned in my book. If I can, I'll grab one in a minute. But anyway, a radiation detector. Back in the day, radiation detectors were like the size of a shoebox. In the old civil defense days. Now they're about the size of a pack of cigarettes, and they've got digital readouts on the front of them. Well, one of the things that we know from our research is that when these events occur, and when a paranormal event occurs, there's typically a spike in gamma radiation. So your meter will all of a sudden alarm and go, "Whoa, there's a hit of gamma radiation." I'm not sure why that happens, but I know it happens a lot. Even like with this on the Skinwalker Ranch, they've noticed that you've got gamma radiation spikes. You've got a magnetic field spikes. So the things that you want to be careful about, if you have a craft that's hovering and it's hovering, it's called electrogravitic propulsion. And it works very similar to like electromagnetic field, but the way it damages skin tissue is very similar to like a microwave. For example, if you walk under a hovering UAP, it'd be like sticking your arm in a microwave oven. And that's the kind of skin tissue damage that would occur. And it'd be bad. The longer you're exposed to it, the worse it would be. So, you never want to walk underneath anything that's hovering. If you have one that's on the ground and it's still powered up, there's sometimes there's like the metal has like a sheen around it, and that is there's some ultraviolet radiation that comes from that, and the way it would affect you would be like getting a sunburn. There's also sometimes radiation in the X-ray spectrum that's emitted from those things, and it's strong enough to cause radiation sickness. So the bottom line is, don't get curious and go running up to there and try to touch it or because you'd be exposing yourself to some type of radiation, which would obviously affect you adversely with your health. And then there's just some things normal things that we talk about, like if you, we've had a number of cases. I've worked on some of these cases where people like put spotlights up on hovering UAPs. Real famous case that we worked on, the huge triangle out in the guy's backyard, and he goes in and gets one of those million candle power spotlights that guys hunt deer with, and he puts it up on the craft to try to see it better. And when he does, a real white hot light beam came down, and it burned him. He had like real bad sunburn. He got down on, he went down fast and he was crawling back in the house, but his arms and the back of his neck and his head was all burned real bad, like he'd been laying out in the sun all day. So I don't know, maybe that is offensive to them and they think it's some type of a weapon system or something, but they might retaliate. Um, the other thing is you're a police officer, you're going to have a firearm in your duty belt, and you probably want to keep it there. I don't think that if you got out and you're walking around a crash scene, if your gun is in your duty belt, that would be expected because of the role that you play. But you don't want to take it out and start pointing it around because that could cause you, it could be very, very dangerous. Because they have, remember, you're dealing with entities that have technology that's 500 years ahead of anything that we've got. Also, one of the things that we've talked about too is that if you do have a crash, these are sentient beings. You know, they have feelings, they have emotions. Um, they and they can understand, they can communicate with you usually telepathically. But if you get out of your police car and you want to maintain an attitude or a mental attitude of compassion and concern, and like, I'm here to help, I'm sorry you guys crashed, I feel bad for you, we'd like to help you, blah blah blah, that kind of mindset's what you want. You don't want to get out of the car thinking I'm going to shoot the first thing that moves, because if you do, that's not going to end well for you. So, just there's other things in the book, but that's basically the kind of thing that we're trying to do. Is again, I didn't write this book so police officers could investigate UFO cases. I wrote this book so, one, they'd understand what's going on, and that they could, most importantly, protect their own personal safety. You see, right now, if I think after someone reads my book, I've talked a little bit about abduction in there, and I would say that most police officers don't really understand very much about what's going on with this. And so if they were to go and, go on a call and somebody's there and said, "Hey, this thing hovered over my house and it took me in their ship and examined me, and there were these weird looking aliens in there, and then they brought me back home again," most cops are going to go, "Okay, this person is like needs mental health, serious mental health problem," and they would probably take him to one of those types of facilities. I think after reading my book, they might actually believe that something like this could happen and maybe did happen to this person, and they might be a little more compassionate towards them or more understanding. Not to say that they still wouldn't get the mental health and physical things that would affect. Sometimes people get burns and they're physical problems that have to be dealt with. The most common injury during a UFO event's injuries to the eyes.
Is it true that there was a military incident? I believe it may have even been the Rendlesham Forest, where there was somebody that had a radiation injury from the UFO that was spotted there, that the military wasn't going to cover the medical treatment for, and eventually there was a hearing, and it got approved to have them covered for the treatment because of the injury from the UFO.
Again, I'm not a real big historian. Most of what I write about and work on is things that I've been exposed to. But Colonel Holt wrote that book, and I've know him and I've been around him when he spoke, and I don't know I couldn't really talk about the specifics of someone's injuries and stuff, but I know some of that stuff did happen, and of course, then the insurance companies probably were trying to figure a way to get out of paying for it or whatever. It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't have any personal hands-on knowledge about that.
About exactly a year ago, there was the Chinese weather balloon, or the Chinese
Mm,
spy balloon thing, and
yeah.
then there was three other UFOs that were shot down that we never really heard anything more about. We saw the pictures of the spy balloon. Did you ever hear anything from your research about
Well,
if there was anything to those other three UFOs
Well,
that were shot down?
the first of all, I think the weather balloons are it's almost like a smoke screen. Those weather balloons or whatever they are, I don't think they're extraterrestrial or any threats or anything like that. But apparently there was some issues where I think it was F-22s intercepted something out over Lake Michigan, and there were that again. I don't have any inside government secret information about that event, but there were a lot of rumors that basically that they shot one down out over the lake somewhere. And but I don't know any specific details about that other than what same as you is there's a lot of times where people in this orbit, they'll put stuff out on Twitter and without being able to be there and verify it, you can't really, I can't verify it one way or the other, but I heard the same rumors you did.
As far as abductions go, I hear that the rates of abductions have actually gone down in recent decades. Is that true from your research? And if so, why do you think that is?
I'm not sure that's true. Um, my my experience with abductions was done early on in when I started doing this in like the late '90s and early 2000s. Um, we did a couple of Discovery Channel shows. One was Chris Bledsoe, where I went out and interviewed Chris, and there were three other guys involved and his son, and we interviewed them all on videotape. And the information that they conveyed to us was all consistent with what each other said, and everything that I was hearing was consistent. Most of the abductees almost all of them that I had met were before I ever met Chris. He was probably one of the last ones I ever worked with. But everything he was telling me was consistent with what all these other people had told me. And so what we did was we had done a lot. We videotaped a lot of the interviews, and then I sent some of those videos to the Discovery Channel show because they were wanting to do some UFO shows, and we sent some of the videos from that, and along with the reports and all that to Discovery, and then they decided to actually do a full hour TV show, Discovery Channel show about that case. And the, since then, see, I went. If you follow my career, basically what happened was in 2008, in seven, the Defense Intelligence Agency had gotten funding together with the help of like Harry Reid, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, and Robert Bigelow, and they put together a program that they wanted to study UFOs. And when that came together, I'm going to see if I can try to make some sense of this. Basically, what happened is Bigelow had a team of people that were working in their facility in Las Vegas, which was a classified facility. And what my role was, I was hired to run it was called the Bass MUFON SIB project. And basically what my job was, I was part of the team the project when we were putting it together, and then I was hired to manage it. And basically what my role was to, we created a team of people, they called them dispatcher. There was like 12 of them, and they worked round the clock shifts. And they would look at the CMS database that was MUFON's, report format system. And they would look at that, database and watch everything that came in there. And typically we get like 800 reports a month. And so these guys would go through there and they would probably, we would vet out all the, lights in the sky and just like really insignificant stuff and focus on really good reports. And what I mean by that is like, you've got an 82-year-old woman that's out walking her dog at 2 o'clock in the morning, and she didn't have her glasses with her, but she sees a light in the sky. That's a UFO report if she reports it. Then You've got an airline flight crew at 35,000 feet that's having a close encounter with something that's 3 times as big as their airplane. That's a UFO report. Now, which one do you want to talk to? And so that's what my team did. They weed through all that stuff and pick out the really good, interesting, substantial cases and then forward them to me. And then what I would do is I would send investigators out to work on those cases. And then once they brought the data back to me and the narratives and everything they discovered, then I would put together a very formal report with a lot of details, and then I would forward that to Bass. And then that was the non-classified side of this thing. So once I forwarded my stuff over to them, on their side of the mirror, if you want to call it that, that was a classified operation. And so once they got that, they were paying us for that data. They're paying us $57,000 a month to provide that information to them. But part of our deal is once they got the information, it was proprietary. And so then they could do whatever they want, and they didn't have to come back and tell me what they were doing, which was part of our deal. So that's kind of how my career moved. And the reason I'm going into this detail is because the criteria that we were looking for in the Bass Project was about, the whole purpose of it was to study propulsion. So we were more interested in cases that had some effect on the ground, like a car comes over, or a UFO comes over a car and the car quits running, or a disc flies over a building and the HVA system blows up, or they fly over a farm and all the driveway lights come on, or a building and the alarm systems go off. That's the kind of stuff we were looking for. So if we got a report and it was about ETs landing and they're jumping around on somebody's roof or something like that, if I wanted to, I could send somebody out to investigate that. But the Bass people weren't interested in that. They weren't interested in cattle mutilations or abductions or anything like that. All our work was geared towards propulsion. So with that all said, the focus of my research went that way, and I didn't really work with that many abductees anymore. But that's not to say that it still doesn't happen. Now, I belong to a group called Opus. I'm on their advisory board, and they're still getting people that are abducted. And basically, Opus is an organization where they call and somebody will try to help them work through the issues. And also, MUFON had a group called their ERT, which was the same thing, where they were still quite busy working with abductees. But my career kind of, because I was thinking the same thing as you. I used to think, I wonder if that's still really happening, but it really is happening still.
Yeah, because I was reading in some places the 70s were the boom period of abductions, and perhaps whatever they were abducting people for, they've found the answers to. But it's interesting that you say this is
Well, I
still
think
going
some of
on.
them, they still, people that are abducted, it's not usually a one-time deal. You'll find that this person may have been abducted when they were a kid. Their mother may have been abducted. So they seem to follow through some of these family lines and stuff like that. And I'm sure they're still doing that if that's what they're doing, if that's what they want to do.
I heard Luis Elizondo talking about that they may have actually figured out how propulsion works. Have
Oh,
you
yeah.
have you heard that?
Well,
That
I know
they've
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, there's, in matter of fact, in the book, the police book, I've got a few pages. It's called Electrogravitic Propulsion, and I just kind of gave an overview of how it works and some of the apparatus that's used to make it work. And I wasn't sure if I should do that, but I did. And the stuff I put in my book's not classified, but there's a lot of information out there about that. I would say that electrogravitic propulsion, anti-gravity propulsion, they probably had a pretty good handle on that for 15 or 20 years. As a matter of fact, I think some of the triangles that you see that people report, some of those are experimental military aircraft. They're not ET. So I'm quite sure they have perfected it.
Now I've heard David Grush talk about why he thinks these craft crash from time to time. For the people that say if these things are so highly advanced, why do they crash? What would your answer be for that?
Well, the fact is they have crashed. And I guess, I mean, these are sentient beings, and although they're much more technologically advanced than we are, I mean, I guess they still make mistakes. I think the biggest thing that has caused crashes in the early days was, during World War II, we had this like really powerful anti-aircraft radar, and a lot of the saucer type crafts would, if they flew through that radar, it would disable their propulsion and cause a crash. I'm pretty sure of that. But now I'm not so sure that some of the crashes aren't done where they're using like scalar weapons and stuff like that to try to knock them down. I'm quite sure that there's some of that going on too.
Yeah, I've heard Tom DeLonge say that Operation Starship Prime, where they actually let off the nuclear bomb in space, was actually to cause some of these UFOs to crash because there's something to do with the electromagnetic pulses let off by these nuclear bombs that disable something on the UFOs. Have you heard anything about this?
Well, I don't have any knowledge of them detonating nuclear weapons in space. Um, and I don't know Tom DeLonge at all. I've never crossed paths with him. Um, there, I think that if you really, some of these people that are like what we call in the know, there's a small handful of people that like involved in government that have a lot of information or have a lot of contact with this stuff. I would say that in general, the consensus of where what I've learned is I think the ETs, they don't like nuclear weapons. And I think that for various reasons, I think they're concerned that we're going to screw this planet up with nuclear weapons. And the other thing I could tell you is that quantum physics, you know, they'll tell you that when you detonate a nuclear weapon, that the energy and the effect of that transcends outside our time space reality that we live in into other dimensions, and it interrupts the fabric of space, which isn't good for the other ones that are out there. Considering that, you know, if you look at that project CERN, that's the particle accelerator in France and Switzerland. It's an underground track. It's like 8 mile loop, and they've come out quite blatantly and said that they've identified 12 physical dimensional realities outside our time space reality, other dimensions. So when you hear somebody say that, it used to be that it was like it was very hard to deal with, but the fact is now we know there are other dimensions, and that part of people ask where these things come from. Some of them do come from other dimensions, and particularly like with pilots, they'll see something, gets right up close on them, boom, it disappears, and then it'll reappear somewhere else. And I think that's what they do, is they shift in and out of our dimension a little bit. Um, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
But I don't
that
know of any
makes sense.
specific nuclear. I don't know of anything that's been detonated in space. Uh, and some of these people think that a big part of the interest that ETs have with on our planet is that they're concerned about the nuclear weapons,
There's a
and they like
fan
to
on
rat.
here that wants to know, sorry, if you ever been to Area 51.
No, no, only in my dreams. It'd be yeah. Going there is the easy part. If they let you come back home again is the hard part. But no, I've not been there.
Now, as you mentioned, some of them might be coming from other dimensions. We obviously know, seems like almost all of them are able to go underwater. Do you do you think there's multiple different types of beings that are visiting us, or is it all one type?
No, no. In the book, people ask me that, and in the book, I talked about three different. Most of the ones, they're all humanoid. By humanoid, I mean that they stand up, they've got two legs, two arms, one head, two eyes, nose, two ears, and they walk upright like we do. That's humanoid. Now, some of those humanoid beings are like little guys about 3 or 4 feet tall, and they're kind of gray and they've got big heads and big eyes. People call them grays. Very common in the research, particularly with abductees. Then you've got a fair amount of them look just like us. They look like human beings. By that I mean if you were sitting next to one in a coffee shop, you wouldn't know it. Except that they'd have, I mean, they'd be able to probably tell what you're thinking and communicate telepathically if they wanted to with you. And then there's other humanoids that are kind of like, they're more scary looking. They've got like reptilian faces, or some of them have a head like a praying mantis and stuff like that, which is obviously more terrifying to the witnesses that are exposed to them. So, yeah, and I think there's probably at least six different uh, races of them that are visiting the Earth and do visit the Earth at different times. Yeah.
Now, do the different races, is there any type of vehicle that's associated with each race? Like you mentioned, the triangles could actually be ours, but for instance, the
Some of
Tic
them.
Tacs, is the Tic Tacs like a specific race vehicle, or
No,
do
I
they
don't.
all?
It could be the Tic Tacs are like probes too, because there was another huge ship that was involved in that thing. But I don't really, at least I haven't been able to correlate any relationship between specific races of ETs and the types of craft they use, other than to say that there are various types of crafts that are seen, which would sort of substantiate the thought that they come from different places and they have different technology.
What are the typical types of craft? You mentioned the triangles. What would be the most common seen types of craft? Because we see cell phone videos of hundreds of different types. Obviously,
Exactly.
some of them are fake.
Well, I think that some of them, excuse me, I was getting ready to sneeze. Sorry. Some there's a variety of them. I put some. I discussed a little bit of that in my book, but basically, you've got triangles, you've got boomerang shapes, you've got saucers, you've got long rectangle, like cylindrical thing. Something that's 300 feet across and round, looks like a big piece of pipe floating around. Um, Orbs are a lot of orbs, different size. Some of them the size of a basketball floating around the yard, and some of them are huge, huge, mile across. And the orbs seem to be some type of intelligently controlled, but we don't know how they work, or obviously. But there's quite a variety of different shapes and sizes. And over the years, you saw a lot of saucer stuff. I think now you're seeing more triangles and some of the other, stranger looking, like these cylindrical things, and they're big too.
We're seeing these pyramid things too that have swarmed some of these Navy ships.
I'm hearing about that.
Um, yeah. Do you think those are from other countries, or do you think
No,
no, they're more likely?
no, no. I think that's kind of like the BS that the spin they try to put on it to hide it. But I mean, the technology on this stuff is like obviously out of this world. In my book, I talked about a study that was done in France. It's called the Cometa, and I put some excerpts in my book about that. But basically, they said that there's probably six different races that are here, and that they believe that the United States is in direct contact with a couple of them, and I think that's probably true too.
Do you think it's them that don't necessarily want to be acknowledged by us, or what do you think the reason is that it's still kind of a mystery to the public anyways, about what these things are?
You mean them that they don't want to be disclosed, the ETs or the
Yeah, do you think
no,
it's the ETs not wanting to be
no,
disclosed,
no.
or the various governments not wanting
It's
to
the
disclose
government.
them?
Basically, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with a bunch of defense contractors and technology companies that are literally making trillions of dollars on this technology, and they don't want to hand it over. There's innovations in transportation, anti-gravity, free energy production, medical innovations, and they're using it for their own profitability, and that's what it's all about. I don't think it's I was talking to some guys at a conference. I probably shouldn't say their name because I didn't ask them to do it, but some guys that have been around as long as me, and we were talking about how come all of a sudden this disclosure starting to happen, and they were saying they think the ETs are pushing it
Very interesting. As far as
because they can't talk that it's going to come out. And I mean, if you think about it, it's almost like they're like, okay, we know we're going to get busted. We know that the public's going to find out about this, so we might as well start feeding it to them one crumb at a time. I think that might be some of what's going on. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, because we don't actually need government disclosure at this point with the internet. There's
There's
so
so
many
much.
ways of communication
Exactly.
that guys like George Knapp could actually disclose this. And I've seen that you actually know George Knapp, don't you?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, I know George. I've known him from back in the Bass days, but I would say George is one of the. He probably knows more about what's going on than anybody else I know. And he's also very ethical. He's done things right. People have shared stuff with him. He keeps it the confidences that he's agreed to keep and stuff like that. But George is he knows a lot of stuff. I've been on I've been on his show Mystery Wire and also I'm 3 times on Coast to Coast with him just recently. One talking about this book too. Yeah. Yeah. George is a very good guy. I like him.
As far as abductions that you were talking about, you've done lots of research into, what would the most typical abduction scenario be? And should it happen to somebody, as how should they react if it happens?
Well, when I first started doing this, I can vividly remember sitting in this lady's living room and she's telling me what happened. I'm fresh out of college. I've got a degree in aeronautics and I've got my flight ratings. It's all very scientific stuff. And this lady's talking about some of the things that happened to her when she's abducted. And I'm just thinking, man, I need to get out of here. This lady's nuts. And then I go interview another one, basically get the same story. And then after I interview about 10 of them, I'm like, oh man, these guys are telling the truth. And if they are, that means half the stuff that I learned in physics in college isn't what we think it is. So that's kind of like how I went into it head first. And and then after a while, the more you study this stuff and the more involved you get with it, there's a lot of paranormal stuff that happens. Like an abductee will a lot of times they will tell you that, they were at home, they were in bed, and something entities came in their room and then took them right out through the wall. And you say, well, that's not possible. Well, it is possible if you understand how dimensions work and higher frequencies of higher dimensions, the density decreases. So technically you could go through the wall. And that's what they do. I think they raise them to a higher frequency, a higher density. They raise them to a higher frequency, which is a lower density, which helps to sort of explain that kind of stuff. But when you're dealing with that, it takes a while to get your head wrapped around that, and some of these guys that are investigating this stuff, there's definitely a period of time where your perception of reality has to change if you really want to get into this and do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've heard some of these procedures that are done on some of these abductees are actually quite painful, and they're
Mhm.
told through telepathy that it's not going to be painful, and then it is. So they might not even understand what they're putting the abductees through. Have you heard anything like this?
Well, I'm trying to remember, there was a conference at MIT, and I don't I've read through some of that. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but basically there were people that were given different types of testimony. There were doctors that had interviewed abductees, and they were talking about basically the difference between human medical procedures and ET medical procedures. And these people are talking about how they put something up through their nose, and the guy could remember hearing a crunching sound when it went through the bone structure up into his brain and that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, there's some stuff that happens like that. A lot of times these people don't remember it because they do something. A lot of the abductees, they seem to be able to do something to them where they can't remember what happened to them. I mean, it's possible. Like if you and go get certain type of medical, like if you get a colonoscopy, they give you a drug so you can't remember what they did to you. Um, and the ETs do stuff like that to them, which is why sometimes we've had to go and get, we've got to we use regression hypnosis to find out what really happened to them. Like someone will be abducted and they'll be all, very stressed and anxious, anxiety, and have like a lot of mental health type issues that result from that, but they don't really remember why. They're stressed and it scared the hell out of them, but they don't remember it enough to articulate the details. And it's amazing when you get and sit down with somebody and use regression hypnosis, which, by the way, has to be done very carefully and very professionally. You have to get people that are highly skilled and certified to do that kind of hypnotic work. But it's pretty amazing because he'll say, okay, well, what happened? And well, yeah, they came over and they took me up and they put me on a table and then they did this to me and they did that to me. And they'll tell you exactly what, they'll talk about what happened. It's pretty creepy actually. But a lot of times they just don't remember it. Some do, but a lot don't.
You think with some of the sexual organs and I've heard of these forced ejaculation procedures they do and so forth, supposedly according to some of the abductees, are they kind of possibly breeding
I think,
or
yeah.
or cloning?
Well, I think you have women that return from an abduction scenario and they'll have the symptoms of a miscarriage, as if somebody basically took the fetus. And I think they are doing some type of genetic breeding experiments. I don't know specifically what, but I think that's part of it, uh, just because it's so commonly expressed when they talk about that stuff.
Now, you say that a lot of your paid research was about the propulsion, which of course, the more scientific people want to know about. What do you think the cattle mutilation and the animal mutilations are all about, if indeed they are the extraterrestrials doing these and not some covert program that that
Yeah, and
our
some
government
people out there will say that they think there's some of that, but basically cattle mutilation, I've never been really involved in it because it's kind of messy and, I'm not really into getting my hands dirty like that, but it's usually, a carcass that's pretty well deteriorated and it's nasty business, but basically you look and you'll see like the side of the head's cut off like perfectly, like with lasers or something. The a lot of genitals and parts of the brain and stuff like that are just missing. And the technology that's used to cut them up is pretty. It looks like a laser or something's done it. And I mean, there's people that really have studied a lot of cattle mutilations, and I mean, it is quite interesting. But nobody's, I'm not sure if we know what the origin of it is. Some people say it's some kind of covert government research, and some people think it's ETs, and it might be both. I don't know.
Yeah, some people say that the government will make it seem like ETs because they don't want to just take a cow from a slaughterhouse. They want more of a pure
Yeah.
test subject stolen. But who knows? It's strange that a lot of the times the genitals are removed though for whatever reason.
Well, I probably get smacked for this, but there have been a couple of humans found like that too.
The Brazilian reservoir case apparently, right?
There's one in Pennsylvania too.
Oh,
They
really?
found what
Could you
left them
share
hanging
that
there.
one?
No, I wouldn't. I didn't work on it, but I just know bits and pieces of it. But apparently, they found a guy that was mutilated like that up in Pennsylvania somewhere. I wasn't. I didn't work on it. I was involved in it. Excuse me.
Someone's asking your thoughts on Dr. Stephen Greer alleged ability to summon
Uh,
aliens. What do you think about this?
well, I've met Stephen Greer. I had lunch with him back in 1999, something like that. Um, I've always, paid attention to what his his presentations and also his movies. And I've not really ever seen him say anything that I didn't sort of figure was pretty legitimate. He's controversial, and uh, sorry, he's controversial, and uh, he has they do a lot of those. It's called a CE5 thing where people go to a location somewhere remotely and then they try to meditate and pull in, um, some type of craft. And I've never done one or been around any one of the things that he's done, but I know that it can be done, and he's not the only one that does it. But yeah, there's people that can do that. And I was there was a group here in Virginia that has done some of those, and I was invited to participate in one, and then we got really bad thunderstorm come in that night. We didn't get to go, but next time they do it, I'm going to go and see what it's all, to just be there and witness it. But yeah, I'm quite sure people that I've interviewed have said that they've been involved in that, and I'm sure it's true. It works.
Someone wants to know what you think about Bob Lazar's testimony about working on alien propulsion technology.
Well, I don't know Bob Lazar. I've never talked to him. Um, I've seen a lot of the stuff that's been done about him. And I mean, based on what I've seen, I think he's probably legitimate. I can't verify that, but he was on. He's been. I think George has interviewed him, and Joe Rogan has, and stuff like that. And basically, there was a time when he came out, and of course, all of a sudden, all his credentials disappeared, and the government wouldn't admit he existed. But I think he probably did work there, and based on what I've learned, that there's other people that have been at Area 51 that basically talk about the same kind of stuff.
There's another fan question on here. I know the government definitely, I've heard from government people there is good military UFO footage that hasn't been released yet, but this person wants to know, despite there being millions more cameras today, why do we still have only unclear or otherwise dubious footage of UFOs? Shouldn't the number of UFO videos have increased? I think the number has increased, but he does
Well,
have a point that there doesn't seem to be as much legitimate footage as there should.
it depends on where you look, but there's some pretty interesting photographs out there. You got to remember that there's a big push in this world to keep this quiet. And I can remember back in the day when I first started doing this, we didn't have databases. We would go and do the investigation. It was on paper, and then you type up the report, and then you send it in manila envelope back to the headquarters and all that back in that day. And I mean, there was all kinds of guys that would be like, well, we took the pictures to the drugstore to get developed, and then when they went back to the drugstore to pick their pictures up, some guys had come in earlier that day and picked them up for them. And a couple of government looking guys in black suits and Crown Victorias would show up and get their pictures. There's some of these people that have databases out there, and they do have some pretty cool there are pictures. There are lots of pictures of them. And for every picture, there's two guys that work for one of the agencies that will try to make you think it's not a good picture. But I don't work on cases very much anymore. We started a group. It's a research group, aerospace research operations, and we the Linda Thomas, who's the head of our research team, had run across some people that owned like a vineyard type thing, and we went and interviewed just for fun. We went and interviewed them, and what was remarkable about it that these guys use they use a drone. They use a drone to check out their property. Like because the place is big, acres, and they have a drone there and they know how to work it. Well, one night the owner's son and another guy were there getting ready to close about 7:30 at night. It's getting dark, and they see this huge UFO up, up in the sky, and at a couple of miles distance from them, and they launched a drone and put the drone up at 1,000 feet, and the drone got some fabulous video, 4K video of it. I mean, really good video. So it's out there. And when I get around to it, we're going to put that up on the aerospace research site just to show like the type of a case we might work. But there's lots of pictures out there. There's just a lot of them suppressed. Even like during the STAR team, I remember there was a case that we worked on. I've talked about it, and basically it was a case where you had some college kids that were hanging out in the park together, and this huge triangle came over, and they took some pictures of it, and then they had some drawings of it. And at the same time, there was a local police officer about 4 or 5 miles away from where they were, took some pictures of it too. And so we had the pictures of this thing from like two perspective angles. One of them was taken by police officers, and the other was taken by these college kids. And they all looked, I mean, you could tell it was the same thing. It's just looking at it from different angles. Well, then the photo analyst comes along and goes, "Oh, no, that's a B-52 bomber that flew over," And and so then you just, I'm like, hold on a second. I've been a pilot for 30 years, and a B-52 bomber doesn't hover over a park or go 5 miles an hour, and so then you've got this yin yang back and forth all the time. But every time, for every good picture there's at least two guys out there that will try to debunk it or tell you what's wrong with it. That's just part of the deal if you want to play in this world.
Are there any public databases of these good footages and photos, or
Yeah.
were they mostly by private companies?
Well, no, I think that you've got the National UFO Reporting Center, Peter Davenport's group, and I think there is some access to that. You can look at some of the reports and stuff like that. And then, of course, you had MUFON, their database system that had like, I mean, it started. You've got reports going back into the 70s in now, and then of course, not to rake up any bad stuff, but MUFON's database was stolen, or hijacked, or whatever you want to call it. They don't have any control of it anymore, and there was literally millions of cases in there. Nobody seems to, you know um I don't want to draw any fire from that because it's so controversial, but they've apparently put out 5 or 6 different versions of what happened and what is happening, and none of them are consistent. So I don't know I don't know what the hell's going on with that. But that was probably one of the biggest databases in the world, and it's just gone. I mean, they've lost control of it. You can't get in it, can't use it anymore, and so I don't know what's going to happen with that. But there were many pictures and video and all kinds of stuff in there back in the day when I had access to it.
As far as your first responders book goes, it's also a guide for like firefighters as well.
Yeah.
Is there a case where one of these things has caused fires?
Um, no, I wasn't really thinking about that. That it could, but it was more about first responders. It depends in the state. Like in Virginia, the fire trucks go to car accidents and stuff like that. So they're involved in all kinds of like rescue operations, and so that's why I wanted to include them. Basically, fire and rescue people, depending on what state you're in and what situation. But I mean, an ambulance person could be involved in an abductee. And I just think that the more these people, like if they read my book, they'll have a fairly good understanding of how this all works. And the fact that you have a fairly good understanding of how it works, reduces the fear factor. If you didn't know anything about this and you just got in the middle of one of these things, it'd scare the hell out of you. And I'm not saying that now you've read my book, it wouldn't scare the hell out of you, but you'd have a little sense of what's happening, and it's not because you've lost your mind and you're imagining that.
As far as the what's going on underwater, I've heard
Uh-huh.
various people say one of the reasons they might go underwater is because there's other planets out there that also probably have water, and the pressure on the craft might be similar to other planets. Other people say there might be bases under there. Other people say the water may be used to fuel somehow. What's your theory on what's going on underwater?
Well, one of the things that we talk about now, there's a term called transmedium vehicles. And what that means is that is a vehicle, it will go through air without any resistance. It'll go through water without resistance. And it can go through the side of a mountain into a cavern or something where there's no doorway or tunnel or anything. It can go through different mediums. And like when you look at I'm not an I'm in aviation, but basically in nautical terms, they have what they call hull speed, which means that a vehicle can only go so fast because the water has to displace around the hull. And I'm not up 100% on this, but I think that about 50 miles an hour is about as fast as it gets with a ship or a torpedo or something like that, as fast as it can go. And these things have been tracked underwater going 400 miles an hour, you know. And part of it is in my book, I talk a little bit about the electrogravitic propulsion and how it works, but it basically puts a it puts a field inside and outside around the vehicle that resists any it's not subject to inertia or anything like that. And that's how you see something that's traveling 3,000 miles an hour and it makes a 90-degree turn. If you were in a jet and it made a 90-degree turn like that, you'd just be jello up against the side of it. You'd be crushed from the inertia. And these things can travel like that, but they have a field around them that there is no inertia, which is how they do it. And the same concept, I think, applies when it goes through the water. But there's always been talk. You know, when we used to do a podcast, and one of the most interesting shows that we did was the underground bases, like the DUMBs, the government underground bases. People are really fascinated by that. And I always have kind of thought that was pretty interesting. And there are quite a few of them. There's a lot of really underground facilities around the country. And I think the thinking is there's plenty of them underwater too. If you think about it, if something's down under the ocean somewhere, it'd be really tough to explore it because you can't. It's obviously not easy to get there. You know.
Now you're talking about bases of the visitors, not bases of the U.S.
Well, I think I'm talking bases of the U.S., but I think that
Okay.
it's conceivable that they have bases underwater and stuff like that. And there are some of these reports that people have talked about where they go into these areas and like the one guy was doing tunneling and they somehow accidentally tunneled into an area where there's a bunch of ETs in there, and it's conceivable. I've never been in one, and again, I've always thought it'd be cool to go there, but the problem getting in is the easy part, getting out's the hard part. I'm sort of
Have
being
you
facetious when I say that, but
have you had any direct encounters, either while you're flying around as a pilot, seeing something weird in the sky,
yeah.
or, or anything?
Well, I I've had I talked about in my book. I was involved in an encounter with a huge UFO and an airline and a private jet back in when I was in flight school. And I mean, I've seen some things like in one of my books. I was flying out over the ocean one day in what they call the Devil's Triangle, and it was a really nice, clear, bright day. And I flew. I could see there was a ship down. I was about 50 miles out over the ocean, maybe 60 miles out, and there was a ship out there. And the reason I'm saying there was a ship out there, it helped me to stay oriented because I could see where I was and everything. But all of a sudden, I'm out there and all my instruments just started, this compass just starts rotating, gyro compass starts rotating, the artificial horizons tumbled, and all your flight instruments just were screwed up, you know. And it wasn't a problem because it was nice out and I could see. But if you were like in instrument conditions in a storm or something, that would have probably been a fatal situation. So there's stuff, there's magnetic anomalies out there, I think, that cause that kind of thing. But and some of the things that like I was in Florida one time flying and there was this huge, it looked like it was up in the sky and it looked like a rectangular shaped hole with fire. It looked like it had fire burning in it. It was real bright orangish. And at the time when I came back that day, they told us, oh, that was the Air Force dropping some foil to test some radar. It was all bullshit. But then some of the stuff that happened on the Skinwalker Ranch, like I read about it's a portal. And at the time, I didn't realize it was a portal until I knew more about how this. But looking back on that, I'm pretty sure that was a portal, like you could see. And everybody goes, "Well, did you fly into it?" And it's like, hell no. I want to get anywhere near it. But I have had some stuff like that. People will ask me a lot. Like when I'm speaking, they'll go, "Well, have you ever been abducted, or have you ever had an encounter?" And I always tell them that that's like asking a police. I'm an investigator and a researcher. Okay, that's like asking a police homicide investigator if you ever murdered anybody. You know, you don't have to be abducted to understand how this works or to research it. And people usually laugh and then they let me off the hook and we can go on to something else.
What exactly piqued your interest into getting into this field as a researcher? Was there something in particular that made you realize that this is a real phenomenon?
Yeah, that's what I said in my book. I talked about I was flying up the coast one night. I was in flight school. I had my commercial license. I was working on my flight instructor rating, and I think I was flying on the right side. And it was at night, and I was flying up the coast at night, and that's when I got involved with this. There was a huge UFO that was hovering out over the ocean, and the pilots were calling the air traffic controllers saying that they had traffic in their flight patterns, and the controllers just kept saying negative radar contact and all that. Well, then I went up to Jacksonville. I was going to land up there, and they wouldn't let me. They made me go into holding, and they said maintain holding for departing military traffic. And these two fighter jets come screaming out of there and went heading up to where these pilots said this thing was. So they basically wouldn't acknowledge it, but they sent fighter jets out to intercept it. So that was kind of like my first time I got involved in something like that, and it's kind of been a lifelong interest after that.
When you were working for Robert Bigelow, did you ever research Skinwalker Ranch at all? Any actual visits to the site?
No, when I was doing what I was doing, I was so busy. If I would have asked them to let me go to the Skinwalker Ranch, they would have made arrangements, but I never did because I never had time for it. Um, there's a book called In Search of the Skinwalker. It's the first book that George and Colin Kelleher wrote about the Skinwalker Ranch. And I did not read that book until after the project was over. But when I read that book, if I would have read that book before I met those guys, I wouldn't have believed half of it. But the fact that I know these guys and what they wrote in the book is 100% accurate. It's a pretty creepy place. And then of course now they're doing the private. They've got some shows out that are really interesting. I've watched some of them. The research they're doing and like the radiation readings they get when something happens and all that kind of stuff. It's still a pretty interesting place. And the guys that when I was in that day, they were going out. Some of those had to go out and work out there sometime. They didn't like it. They said it's the creepiest place they've ever been in their life. It is creepy out there.
Do you think there's a connection to paranormal activity and UFOs? Because we
Oh
hear
yeah,
that now that there seems to be some correlation between the two.
absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things when I wrote my first book, we kind of ended it like when we end the investigation. And I think as I'm writing another one, a sequel to, more investigators guide. But I think one of the things that I missed was that when someone has an encounter, a UFO experience, you need to go back and interview them 6 months or a year later and see what kind of paranormal stuff happened in their house afterwards, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah,
And there
I've
there is a
heard
lot of that
similar
happen,
stuff.
you know. If you did you read the book Skinwalker at the Pentagon? Again, George Knapp and
I've seen lots of interviews about it, but I haven't read it.
yeah, well, there's basically the book starts out and these guys are out walking around on the ranch. And it starts getting cold and they're experiencing some like weird stuff. Well, then when they all went back to their homes in Virginia, they started experiencing like paranormal activity in their house. It like follows them home.
Yeah, they call that the hitchhiker effect,
That's
I
right. And
believe.
some of those guys that wrote that stuff I know, and they're not kidding. It really happened to them.
I've seen that George Knapp has like all these praying mantises at his house as well now. Like they're, for some weird reason, his house is surrounded by the actual praying mantis insects.
I didn't
Do
know
you
that,
think
but
that has,
I don't know.
yeah,
I knew that. I never talked to him about that. Maybe there's
yes, do you think there's
that.
some connection with the insect and the
Well,
alleged
what I know is
creature?
that there are some ETs that have had encounters with people that look like praying mantis. Their heads look like that, which would
Very
probably scare the hell
interesting.
out of you, you know?
Yeah, that's even if you know about it, if you read your book and you're familiar with this, you wake up in the middle of the night and there's a giant praying mantis staring at you. Speaking of which, is there one of these types of potential ETs that seem to have more of a negative intention than others, or is it all pretty neutral from what you understand?
Well, I think that there's some, in my book, I wrote about there's like 6 different things that's gonna make it hard to disclose this stuff. And one of them is they call it the false flag. And there's a lot of people in my orbit, um, that think that they might really do that. In other words, that the defense contractors, in order for them to suck up more money from Congress, they will try to portray the ETs as being hostile and dangerous, so we can give them all kinds of allocated money to protect us from them. And again, so then Congress will be bringing the cash register, and those guys will be getting richer than they already are, um, to develop more weapon systems to protect us from ETs. And if that's true, I said that in my book. If you're going to do that, go down that road. Before you can go down that road, you've got to make sure that you tell the public they're real. You see what I'm
So as
saying?
far, yeah, from your research, what do you think their intention is? Do you think they're just watching us, uh, or do you think Earth is just an intersection of one of their dimensions, and they're appearing through that, or is there some type of material here that they come here to collect? Because it seems like they've been visiting us since the beginning of time.
That's true. I think so. I mean, you can see all kinds of drawings in caves and pyramids of flying saucers and stuff like that. Um, but if you ask me what I personally think, based on all the stuff that I've run over through in my life, I would say that I think that probably their biggest concern is in nuclear weapons. And again, the common claim that the U.S. has been in touch with a number of um, a couple of different races of ETs that are here, and some of these guys that we've interviewed recently, like way high up in the agencies, interviewed a guy a few weeks ago, and he basically said that the United States is in touch with that. There's two extraterrestrial societies that are working directly with our government here, and that their prime objective is eradicate nuclear weapons. That's what he said. I mean, and that's a very, very nice thought if that would really happen. And he said that they'll take all, if somebody tries to use a nuclear weapon, they'll take them all, including the ones in space. So that's a nice thought. Can't prove it, but if you ask me what I think, and I think that that's where they're at, that that's what they're more worried about than anything is is nuclear problems with nuclear. And I mean, this is kind of a weird thought, but think about this. There was some people that had encounters with ETs, and the ETs told them that they came from some point in the future. And the ETs are telling these people that basically you guys are our ancestors. And if you destroy this planet with nuclear weapons, we won't exist. Think about that for a couple days, and it, that sort of makes some sense. At the risk of sounding a little crazy, I think there might be something to that.
Yeah, I've heard Jacques Vallée say something similar about time travelers
Yep.
theory on these things. As far as people like Tim Burchett, the Tennessee congressional rep,
Yeah.
trying to go public about this and really
Yep.
digging deep into this, do you think it's only going to be a matter of time now between the members of Congress that are really pushing for this, the credible ex-military coming out about it, and the public more and more coming out like naturally in the public domain? Do you think it's only going to be a matter of a couple years before
It'll be
this
sooner than that.
become,
It'll be
yeah,
sooner than that. Yeah. Um, Tim Burchett has done an awesome job. And he started out, there were a handful of those guys, and now there's a whole bunch of them. When Gresh testified, and the inspector general, essentially, Gresh and those other guys, part of that process where they testified was they were filing formal complaints about this, which the inspector general was charged to investigate. And upon conclusion of that work that they did, the inspector general came out and said that this is a grave issue of critical importance that needs to be dealt with by Congress immediately. That was their finding. Now, since David Gresh came out, the inspector general had done a lot of research on a lot of the stuff that he told them, he said in his hearing. And it was about a week and a half ago, the inspector general convened a classified briefing for some members of Congress. And I think there's maybe 25 or 30 people involved in that. And I mean, I think they pretty much laid it out that because when they came out of there, all of them said that they definitely validated everything David Gresh said, but they couldn't specifically talk about the classified stuff, but that everything that Gresh said was verified. And a couple of them were just like, "Oh, this. I just got to go home and lay down." It's just overwhelming what they've told us. And so now you've got 25, 30 members of Congress that have been briefed. And Burchett said something like, "Okay, I'll let go of all the stuff about the entities and little green men and all that. I just want to know where the trillions of dollars of black budget money went and why it hasn't ever been accounted for." And some of them are thinking that too. You see what I'm saying? So these guys aren't going to let go of this. The bottom line is, and I'm not an expert on the going-ons in Congress. People brief me and tell me what's going on, and because I'm not there and I wasn't there, but the bottom line is that you've got you've got all this stuff that's going on. You can't once you open a can of worms, you can't put it back in the can again. And so you've got a lot of these people that have a very high understanding of what this is all about, and it's totally bipartisan. You've got Burchett on one side and AOC on the other side, and they're about as politically opposed as you can get. And they're both sitting there screaming at these guys at the Pentagon saying, "Hey, you got no right to hide this from us." And I think that there was a few in Burchett, and a couple of them went to some military facility, and a 4-star general comes out, and he's all puffed up and goes, "I'm sorry, but you don't have a high enough security clearance to talk to these pilots and stuff." And Burchett, when they came back to Washington, they said, "Yeah, we don't have that high, but we do have control of your paycheck, and we're going to shut your budget off," which I thought was kind of funny and probably needs to happen. But there's a huge battle, and it's I don't think it's going to go away. Um, what you're dealing with is the first year they put the language in the National Defense Authorization Act, uh, that basically gave immunity to these guys like David Gresh to come forward and testify. And then this year, they were trying to put language in there that would basically say that the defense contractors had 6 months to disclose any extraterrestrial wreckage and bodies that they had, and that they were going to try to get subpoena power to go after them if they wouldn't do it. And at the 11th hour, that bill got squashed, and it was the guys in Congress that fought it. Or if you look at those guys and where all their money comes from, it all comes from the defense contractors.
Yes, yeah, I saw that. So that's the only issue that's going to come up politically to kind of slow this down. It won't be one party or another being against it. It'll be who's getting funding from the contractors.
Well, I think what it is, and in my book, I tried to explain that there's a lot of stuff that's been done. You know, there was there was a guy named Philip Corso, and he wrote a book. I think it's Beyond Roswell or something like that. Him and Bill Burns wrote it. Corso's dead. I talked to Bill about it a couple of months ago, and basically, in his book, he said that was his job. He was a Pentagon. He worked in the Pentagon. He was a colonel in Army intelligence, and that's what his deal was. He was going around working deals with technology companies and giving them stuff that had been recovered in crash wreckage so they could do the research and engineering on it. And he even talked about some of them, like he said, fiber optic tubing. The first fiber optic tubing was recovered in UFO wreckages and was given to Bell Laboratories. DuPont got the Kelvar materials, and then IBM and Texas Instruments and some of these technology companies got the microchip stuff. And by the time Eisenhower was ready to leave office, they were telling him, they wouldn't tell him what's going on. And there's some evidence that indicates he might have threatened to come out there and bring the first cavalry out and tear the place up if they didn't tell him what he wanted to know. And apparently they did tell him what he wanted to know. But he's probably the last president that had a real good handle on what was going on out there.
Very interesting. So what do you think Trump knew about it? Because I remember at first, when he first went into office, he was saying that he didn't really believe in any of this, but then as time went on, he claimed that he saw the Roswell files and they were very interesting, and he
Yeah.
became less anti-UFO. Was he just doing that to gain supporters, or do you
No, I
think
think he
he
probably
actually?
did. He probably did get involved with it and knew it was real. And but again, you're dealing with a whole bunch of defense contractors that they don't like Trump and they don't like anybody talking about UFOs. So I could see how they give him a hard time about that. Maybe
And some people say Trump would have leaked it just to be the president that let it out.
that'd
But
be interesting.
do you
Yep.
believe that if Hillary Clinton was elected, that she would have disclosed? Because it seems like she was
Uh,
really
I
wanting
don't.
to.
I don't. I don't. I don't know. Uh, Clinton. I don't know. I never really paid that much attention to. I didn't pay that much attention to anything about UFOs that she ever said. I know that there was uh, there was something with Clinton. He was on one of those shows back when he was president, and he was like, they were asking him about the UFO stuff and why don't you tell me? he made a comment like, yeah, if I want to end up like Kennedy or something like that, you know. So I don't know.
Very
Whether
interesting.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it you still got me, don't you? I thought I lost you there for a minute, but I didn't.
Yeah.
No,
No, I'm here, but I appreciate you coming on. I'll put up your book again here.
thank you. I
The
appreciate it.
first responders. It is available on Amazon and
It's all
langpublication.com.
yep. Thank you for doing that. Appreciate it. But
Yeah, so give us a good reason why particularly first responders might want to pick this book up.
well, I think that that's the whole thing, and I think that what's going on is that you've got a lot of people out there in the public that don't really understand how this works. And I know that even in my world, I have some friends that like at the university and stuff like that. I was talking to a law professor the other day, and I was telling her about my books and the UFO thing, and she was like totally clueless. She goes, "You got to be kidding me! Never had any idea that anything like this was ever going on." And she bought my book and read it, but I think that what's happened is with Gresham, all those other uh, people out there that are bringing the public up to speed. If you're a sheriff or a police chief in a community somewhere, and now it's all of a sudden like this is real. We always thought it was kind of BS or like something to make fun of, but now it's real. You're going to want your people trained to understand it and protect themselves for their personal safety, and that's what my book is for. And that's why I wrote it. And that's what I'm hoping that people that buy it and read it. And also we're trying to put together. I'm working with the guy Keith Taylor. He's former NYPD's college professor now. He was head of the SWAT team in New York City during 9/11. He's got a lot of really um, awesome law enforcement experience. Teaches law enforcement now in a college, and that's what we've been working on. He did a survey a couple of maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and there's like 1,800 police departments in the United States, and I think he contacted 450 of the biggest ones in the country, and basically asked them, "What kind of programs do you have to teach your people about UFOs or prepare for any type of a UFO event?" And all of them said none. They have nothing. So it's something that's going to start to happen, I think.
Very good. Well, I'm glad that there's a base now. Of course, there have been people like John Lear that have claimed like the Air Force does have like supposedly a section in the handbook on UFOs. But did you ever hear anything about
No, I've
that?
not seen that, but I know that they did that for a while and then they suppressed it. So now they can get I'll give them some of my books if they want.
Very interesting. Well, thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate all the knowledge, and I'll let
Hey,
you close this off with whatever you want to tell the viewers.
no, I appreciate the time that you guys took to talk to me today, and I just think we're going through. If anything, I think we are in a point of time where this is all coming out soon. I mean, soon by like before the year's over. Most of it's coming out. You just can't. You can't put that much information out and tell these congressmen. I mean, they're basically telling the truth of what's really happened and is happening. And you can't expect those people to just go back and go, okay, well, I guess we'll just forget about this. They're not going to do that. And especially when you look at all the money that's being allocated to these projects, that they're not going to let it go. And although they got beat on the National Defense Authorization Act at the 11th hour, the language to make the defense contractors disclose what they have got taken out of the bill. Um, I don't think it's over yet. I don't think it's over yet.